Hi, thank you for showing up. So before we move past the first slide, I just wanted to explain what I mean by friction. And I'm going to talk about using technology in your graduate work to remove friction. As opposed to friction, there are things which move along smoothly, easily. For example, if you're in an office environment and you're working people and there's a lot of tension or bad communication, I regard that as friction. If it's taking you 5 to 8 times to get things longer to get things done than it should, that kind of stuff is friction. It slows you down and makes it difficult. Whereas technology ideally should not slow you down. You should not be spending more time to figure out how to use the technology in order to make your graduate work and your graduate life easy. Instead, the technology should expedite and smooth things out. I like to think of it as a very nice lubricant that makes life calm and easy. And when we look at technology in our graduate work, that is often a lens that people forget. They think, oh, it's tech, it's sparkly, I must use it, and spend hours learning how to use the technology instead of actually doing my readings. Not the best decision-making process. So this is about using technology intelligently to decrease your stress and to improve the quality of your learning and hopefully your experience while here. Today we have this broken down into 5 different areas. First, I want to set up a common context in terms of what graduate study actually is in our environment. Then the skills that you already have, draw on what you've got, some practices to develop, and then some tools which are useful for graduate students, some pragmatic tools. And then we have some bonuses at the end. Bonus, yes. I wish it was food, I wish it was money, but I do not have those to offer you. And there we go. What you see up here is an image of a dovetail, and I like to think of that in terms of as a working metaphor for a lot of stuff in graduate school. There are those things which you have already of assets, understanding, skills, connections, and then there are those things which you don't have but which you need in order to succeed in terms of your career or your goals. They can mesh up, and ideally, if you know what you have and you know what you're looking for, you can figure out a way to integrate them. Tech can make that happen. What we do in graduate school is essentially, at the master's level, developing your mastery and knowledge of specific content. Notice, mastery of, you're not generating or contributing to the field, instead you're developing your own understanding and mastery of. This is an important distinction. So you are trying to understand what's happening in your environment. The technology is there to support and enhance your learning process, your mastery of your field. It is not there to be the object of your study unless you're in computer science or unless you're in educational technology. The technology is there to facilitate your learning, and when you are working with technology, you want to avoid stuff which distracts you. Filtering noise, that's a difficult one in easing use. And finally, this is something that's often forgotten in graduate school and depending on your field, but I believe in this strongly. If you do not have concretized experiences, i.e. visceral physical experiences, where you can apply your knowledge, you will forget it. It will become irrelevant. You won't recall it because it means nothing to you. It has had no impact. While it might be a great idea upstairs, in the rest of your world, you will probably forget. There are people who live in their heads, and this is wonderful, but overall I have encountered maybe 2 graduate students out of scores and scores who live in that place. So generally speaking, concretized experience. In other words, what we're doing as graduate students and in graduate programs is you're going out and you're getting information. Then you're comparing it to lived experiences. Not just your own lived experiences, because that would be narcissistic and egotistic. What you're doing is you're comparing it to your own as well as scholarly and non-scholarly representations of lived experience in your field. Then you're testing and you're comparing what other people say to what you think and what you've lived. You develop an evidence-based opinion and you give feedback. Then you go and you develop more information. And you gather more information. It's an iterative cycle that goes over and over and over again. Technology can support you in all of these aspects, but again, it's there to support and integrate. It is not there as the topic, and again, unless you're in computer science or ed tech. Where this becomes important is when we think about where we actually live. This is a visual representation of a Facebook network and people who know other people. Some people are like me. They have very few connections and they just know a few individuals. Other people are the center of massive hubs, and there are all of these relationships. But notice, this is not linear. These are a series of nodes which are scattered and spread out. This is how we operate on a day-to-day basis. This is how information flows. It does not flow in a strictly linear fashion. So essentially, information is normally delivered in a linear fashion in the classroom. This is often based on the tree model. The tree model is a gross oversimplification of how information actually works. This is a rhizome. Rhizome is like ginger. It can sprout out from any of the nodes and go in any direction at any point on the item, on the rhizome. This is much more accurate in terms of how information functions if you think back to the web with a network. But when we teach and when we're trained, traditionally it's step by step, outline, linear order, linear structure. Neither one of these is better than the other. This, when we're working with students, when we're working with colleagues and we need to present information, often we want things in a linear order because it helps us make sense of it. But how information actually flows is usually based on the rhizome or the web. It sprouts out. For example, rarely do you hear what's happening in your workplace from your boss. Normally it's from your colleagues and other people around campus. That's what I mean by it's not linear, it's not top down, it's often horizontal or coming up from other people who you know. When we're working with information for graduate school, it's important to realize that your information sources are not just those which are handed down to you, and you should not just work with that kind of information. You can have a much more rich experience. The idea behind the different tools and the practices is to facilitate your dovetailing as smoothly as possible while supporting some balance in your experience so you have time for your life. Rather than allowing technology to drive you and gather endless oceans of information, knowing when and where and how to set borders on the amount of information you use is important. Not everybody knows how to have balance in their work/school lives. In terms of the skills that you already have, you've already developed, I'm sure, basic research skills. You already have writing skills, and all of us use the web all the time. These are things which you already possess. But what you need to be aware of is that just as you need to scale up your research skills and your presentation skills, you also need to scale up your technology skills. If you don't, your graduate academic work will likely suffer, and you do not want that to happen. It will happen because of issues of time. Search. This is where people have the greatest potential to grow, greatest potential to save time, and are probably lazier than almost any other area because it's convenient. Google's first page results almost always, scholars down to high school students and middle school kids, we almost always stop at the first page. But what we need to realize is when we work with Google, we have a different search interface than if we're working with YouTube, than if we're working with podcasts, and a lot of this has to do with the metadata and how sophisticated those search engines are and how sensitive they are. And if you don't learn to differentiate, it's like preparing the same meal for the in-laws when they come over, as for your coworkers when they come over, as for some brand new people that you met. You're serving the same dish of macaroni and cheese with, some tuna fish mixed in to all of them. Not appropriate. What you need to do is to understand different information types, different search engines require different search procedures. Now this, if any of you actually invest time in this, I will be amazed. But you need to. The best thing that you could do is to improve your search skills. And that is knowing how to write different search queries in Google. Actually going to the cheat sheets, actually watching those. I swear to you, I give you my word of honor that you will, for every minute you invest, you will save between 5 to 20 minutes over the next year. It's amazing how much a tutorial can save you in terms of frustration and the narrowing of searches and finding information which is relevant to you. Almost nobody does this. RTFM is from CodeSpeak. I have adjusted it slightly to refer to the friendly manual because we don't have time to read the manuals. But they have manuals. The manuals are searchable. And you can sit there and try and work out software. How many of you are masters of Adobe suites? How many years did it take you to master your Adobe suite?
Oh, I'm still learning.
You're still learning it. Buttons everywhere. And even trying to get Photoshop to work was a 20 to 25 minute exercise in my own exasperation. Why? Because I didn't read the instructions. I didn't go to YouTube because I'm a smart guy. I can figure it out. I felt like throwing the computer around, but I didn't. Go to YouTube, and there are an array of tutorials that show you how to do things. You can go to Adobe TV. The point is, rather than get something that you're excited about and then become very frustrated with, it's like having a course that's offered. You're really excited. You show up. The professor is boring, and you have no idea, how am I going to resolve these two? You resolve it by being excited about the content. Same thing with this. You show up, the software is exciting, but you don't know how to operate it. How do you engage? It's the searchable manual. There are video tutorials, there are PDF tutorials, and if you learn how to craft proper searches to find those tutorials, you will increase your productivity, and your friends and your coworkers will know that you're an asset, because even though you don't know how to do it, you know how to find the answer. And it's much less about mastery than the mastery of finding the answers. Over here are my 5 and 20-minute rules. If it is a small, and of course I break these. I try to, this is best practice. If I can't figure something out in my Gmail and I want to sort, I may spend 5 minutes trying to figure out those tips. But it's a small issue. It's not a crisis issue. But if it's 5 minutes, I give myself a timeout. Why? Because I'm frustrated, I get annoyed, I lose focus, and I'm completely distracted. So rather than actually responding to grad student queries, I'm trying to figure out how to resort and refilter my email. Not a productive use of time. Spend 5 minutes, it doesn't work, you can come back to it later. On the larger things, such as formatting a document, preparing a presentation like this, if there's a serious issue with software, I spend up to 20 minutes. If it goes over that, then it's usually not good for the relationship at home or the coworkers, because that kind of frustration will block you, and it's difficult to see because you've been blinded by your own frustration and the limits of your searches. That's where you need to take time and step aside. This alone will save you hours and hours of time. And I developed this out of my own experience, but also listening to students in my online classes who said that they spent 2 hours trying to solve a problem, and I'm sitting there going, oh my God, you did what? If they would have taken just 5 minutes or 10 minutes and then called it quits, move on to another problem. It is not worth any more of your time, and you need to value your time and know that there are other solutions. So some practices to develop. If you have these already, excellent. If not, these are the highest return on your time investment that I could possibly suggest to you based on my own experience. I'm happy to share the slideshow with you later on. It's a Google presentation if you want to track some of this down. Essentially, if you name files properly, it works well. My example as faculty, I use Google Drive. A number of my students are submitting assignments. It's the Week 2 Foundations write-up. Almost all of them have Week 2 Foundations write-up, so it shows up in my drive as Week 2 Foundations write-up, no last name. Because it's from their computer, so of course, why would they need to do that? But does it have a class number? Usually most of them do not say Ed 633 or CSE 624 or one of those. What I would suggest to you is that by properly naming your files and your folders so that you can find them 6 months from now, you will prevent enormous emotional angst, that kind of friction you will avoid, because you will locate 80 to 90% of the things that you want. Additionally, when you're trying to share things with other people, they will know what you're actually sharing with them. It's just like an email with no subject line. Do you open those up or do you wait until you have dead time to open those up? I never open those up until it's later. A specific subject line works. Versioning. I know a fair number of people that do not, especially as students, they write the same paper and they save it on the same sheet over and over again, same document. Why? We have plenty of storage. If you save different versions, you can document the history and the development of your paper. If any questions of plagiarism or authenticity ever arise, you have the history of it. If you have brilliant insights which you cut out by accident, you can go back and find it. You have like gigabytes of storage, so there's no reason to not have additional copies of the document. Preserve copies of all your work, drafts, hard drafts, just everything. This also works very well, in my opinion, so that you can see how much time and effort you are putting into your work, and you can track the growth and the development. In order to appraise your own progress, this is very useful. When we have that self-doubt demon that shows up, we can look at this kind of information and we can see that we have 8 drafts of the paper and we can tell it to take off because we know that we're working hard. And then cross-platform saving. I have an example. I'll be right. Okay, so you can vouch for this as being accurate. You can take your iPod or your smartphone with Evernote. I can borrow this book from the library or from my colleague. I can set it up so it's optimized for a page, take a picture of it, then it syncs across on my iPad and all of my other devices. The app is free. One of the benefits is that if you're doing scholarly research or you're doing work on papers and you forget or you don't want to write down the name of a book, you can take a picture of the cover, you can take a picture of a couple of the key pages in there, you have your reference, you have your citation, you have your material. But what this also needs to do for you is across the multiple platforms. Google Drive we have for free already. You should have an external backup drive. If you don't, you're nuts. I've known people that have lost master's theses. It's gone. Bye-bye, hundreds of hours. And how many tens of thousands of dollars of debt are you investing into your education? Treat it like an investment. You just don't leave stocks and bonds sitting around. Cloud-based backup across multiple devices. Sustainable password practices. I got tired of trying to remember everything. I got tired of doing spreadsheets. I have one kind of password for all of my personal financial information. Taxes, bank access, has nothing to do with anything else. Then I have my throwaway password. Just log in, check out the site, what are they offering, what are the options, just garbage. Anybody could hack that in probably 5 seconds. Then there are the tools that I use regularly, like Evernote, Gmail, I can't think of it, like Spotify, those kind of things. What I have is a solid core plus something that differentiates for the site related, and then a non-alphabetic variable. So for example, if I like Joss Whedon in Star Trek, this is how I remember, 89, the year I graduated, and then the consonants from the Gmail site. I find it easy to either select all the consonants or the first 3 consonants or the first 3 vowels, last 3 consonants, last 3 vowels for the site, and then some kind of weird fragment number, and then there's a /. And I like Boba Fett, obviously Star Trek fan. So again, Boba broken up with a number, Fett, Asana, which is a site, the 3 primary vowels, and something at the end. If it were other sites, then it wouldn't be AAA, it would be Boba 42 Fett, GML, question mark, or Spotify, it could be SPT. That way you don't have to remember everything, and I can look up at the site and what is the site's name, and then I can remember what my full password is. This can save you a lot of time and frustration. In terms of tools for graduate studies, there are tons of tools. There are more than you will ever have time to explore. The best thing you can do is find tools that other people suggest to you or that you just happen to stumble across. Spend between 10 to 30 minutes exploring it. If you don't get it, don't waste your time. Move on to something else. It's not as if there's a limited availability of awesomeness. There's an ocean of awesomeness. You just have to find it. Don't worry. Everything you need is already out there. If you don't know what a bibliographic manager is, please write that down. What this does is this tracks all the PDFs, books, articles, etc. that you will use in your scholarly life. There are free versions, Zotero and Mendeley. Then there's paid versions also of Mendeley and EndNote. You can write notes, you can organize, you can sort, you can connect this to your word processor so it imports the citations. It takes time to learn how to do that. If you are in graduate level coursework right now, learn how to use those tools before you hit your thesis. And this moves again back to the friction. As you begin your graduate school process, you can develop tools and habits that support your success so that by the time you are nearing completion and you are ready to get out of here and you want to complete your final project, it will be fluid because you won't be learning how to use these tools. Backup. Almost the common level that's available now is 5 gig. If you want more Google Drive, just open up another Gmail account. I mean, really. Or Dropbox has up to 5 gig free, and I think you can get up to 11 by getting all your friends to join or something. I wouldn't sync it with your secure information like your bank accounts, but other than that, I back up primarily across Google Drive, and then epic information like my doctoral dissertation I put into Dropbox, and I just kind of forget that it's there. Cross-platform authoring and capture, again, pointing to Evernote. I'm sure that there are other resources you can use, other tools that you can use. Photos, marking up PDFs, but the point is that no matter where you are, if you have an idea or information, you can create it, take a photo of it, and then you can tag it and put it into your folder, and it's going to go across all of your devices. This also means that should something happen to your phone, your iPad, your laptop, you do not lose all of that information. Always assume that your hardware is going to break down. It's going to get stolen, broken, or disappear, get outdated. So you must preserve the integrity of the information because the biggest investment you have is in your time and your effort. It's not the computer. It's the effort and the resources you got. There's also time management software. Asana I recommend if it's just you or you're working with a small group of people. Obviously don't have time to go over it. Really great, but if you're working with more than say 3 to 5 people, or you're here on campus regularly and your faculty use Google Calendar, learn how to use it. Their appointment setup is quite nice. Lots of tutorials available on that. Lovely reminders too. Many academic presentations discuss primary places to find sources. They're scholarly. Google Scholar, all right, yes. And then we have the databases, yes, the library. Robert Monge presented on this. He has a great resource for this. I'm a little bit weird because I like to go other places as well. Scribd.com is essentially a giant PDF document sharing site. Once you run a couple searches, you will encounter a huge number of scholarly texts that appear semi-randomly. This is like browsing in the stacks. So it's not just ordered by your own perspective, it's also just what the search engine thinks you might be interested in. Lots of PDFs. Academia.edu, it's like Facebook for academics. If you don't know about it, you might go there, start a profile up. But one of the benefits is that you can track scholars. You can track scholars, and when they upload articles and papers, you can download those. That's actually where I found a lot of content for my instructional design course. And then occasionally they upload the material and I get their permission to use it. And the search hack, I don't know if you know this already, but when you enter in Google, whatever your search terms are, do file:PDF. That's just one of about, I think, 70 different short phrases, terms that you can use with Google to do searches. You can do file MP3, file MP4, but I do file PDF because then what it pulls up is a list of all these PDFs. So if I'm looking for usability, this is another way to find available on the web. I don't have to go through the database because I hate the database interfaces. They stink. I don't like them. They frustrate me. So this is my hack. And then when I get those names, I go into the databases and then I search. So I don't like databases, academic databases. But then again, if I spent more time learning how to use the tools, it would probably be much easier, right?
All right. Well, thanks for coming. My name is Ryan West. I'm the Associate Director of Financial Aid and Scholarships here at Western. And for this presentation, although it's for those of you here at Western, it's more general in nature. So everything that I'm talking about is not specific to WOU, but it's applicable to WOU. So we're going to talk about financial aid options, some of which don't exist here in great quantities, some of which do. And so I'll sort of highlight those sort of pieces for you as we go along. So the topics that we're just going to run through today, we're going to talk about federal financial aid, certainly, scholarships, some scams, assistantships, employer assistance, and cost considerations. I'll tell you from my personal experience, I think grad school was a wonderful opportunity for me. I didn't go to college initially thinking I would get a graduate degree. Nobody else in my family had gone to college, so I don't even know if I would have known what a graduate degree was. But now on this side of my graduate education, it was probably one of the richer times. I enjoyed my undergrad, but I loved once I found this is what I want to do with my life, this is where my passion is, being able to focus on that. So I don't want to come off sounding too negative. I think there's really good reasons to go to graduate school, and I think there are some people that don't have good reasons to go to graduate school when they do, but I think there's a lot of realistic concerns that need to be pre-thought out before you just sign up and jump in with both feet and find yourself in a lot more debt than maybe was worthwhile or made good sense. So talking about federal financial aid, the bad news about federal financial aid for graduate students is most financial aid is in the form of loans for graduate students. Typically, eligibility for federal and state grants ends once you get your first bachelor's degree. So whether you're pursuing a second post-baccalaureate degree or whether you're pursuing a graduate degree or a PhD, there is federal financial aid available for all those programs, but it is going to be in the form of student loans. The annual loan limit is $20,500 for the Stafford loan program, which is the most common loan program that most U.S. schools participate in. That is all unsubsidized loan, meaning the government does not subsidize the interest for you any longer. That ended several years ago that graduate students used to be able to get subsidized loan. Now they can't. So unfortunately, graduate education has sort of taken several hits as far as federal financial aid policy is concerned, as the federal government looks for more money to pour into programs like the federal Pell Grant, which benefits needy undergraduate students. Graduate students have sort of paid the price in the options that are available to them. There are other loan options available for graduate students. The Graduate Plus loan helps people be able to borrow up to the cost of attendance, which is basically a sort of an all-encompassing estimate of tuition fees, room and board, books, miscellaneous transportation costs, a whole lot of money. There are loan options available. Whether that's a good option, is a completely different conversation. But to qualify for Graduate Plus loan, you do have to have either no credit history or an okay credit history. You just can't have an adverse credit history. So you will not be approved for that loan if you have bad credit, bankruptcy, late payments, those sort of things. The Stafford loan is not credit-based, so it's available to anyone as long as you meet the basic eligibility requirements. One grant that is available for graduate study is called the Teach Grant, and I use the term grant really loosely because it's really more of a loan in grants clothing, I suppose, in that it's given out as a grant, and we'll talk about the eligibility here in a minute, but there's a service requirement, and if you don't complete the service requirement within the requisite amount of time, that grant is converted to an unsubsidized loan with retroactive interest back to when you got it. So if you go into it knowing that risk and knowing the gamble, it's fine. Our concern in kind of the financial aid community is that do people stop reading once they saw grant and $4,000 and then didn't really realize that there were service requirements and how much more money this could mean in loan debt. It is available for graduate students for up to 2 years of study, and it says on my slide, and this is still the law, up to $4,000 per year. Under the budget sequester in the federal government budget, the actual amount available for teach grants has been reduced 5 times now, the most recent October 1st of this year. So it continues to change. So I'm leaving this in there because statutorily $4,000 is what the grant is. You can have $8,000 of teach grants over the course of your graduate education, but currently, as of today, the maximum teach grant you could receive for 3 terms for 1 academic year would be $3,760. But it is available. To be eligible, you need to be working in some sort of teacher preparation program, because when you get out, you need to teach for 4 years within 8 years of leaving your program as a highly qualified teacher in a high-need field at a low-income school. Graduating from Western's programs as a highly qualified teacher, not going to be a problem for most students. And finding a low-income school, also not very difficult anymore. The high-need field is probably the piece that's the most difficult in this, in that the Congress is the one that has defined high-need field, and those currently are pretty limited in that they're defined as foreign language, mathematics, science, bilingual education, English language acquisition, special ed, or reading specialist. So in a program like Western, especially for our undergrads where we graduate a lot of early childhood, elementary teachers, this is not a good program for them. Elementary ed is not a high-need field anywhere in this country right now. If you know you want to be a special education teacher, or math teacher, science teacher, then certainly this would be a program to at least consider. There are some other programs that might be available to graduate students. I say might be just because both of these programs are pretty limited in their funding. So the federal government gives schools funding for these programs. Schools then determine who the neediest students are to dole those funds out to. The federal Perkins program hasn't been funded for a number of years, but as students repay schools, we use that money to loan back out. So some schools may not allocate funds for these programs to graduate students. Some schools may. At Western Oregon, we are currently not allocating Perkins loan to graduate students, but we do allocate work study to graduate students. So it sort of depends. These would both be federal financial aid options available to you. For all federal financial aid, the application process is with the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid. You can apply online, fafsa.gov. Many of the funds, the smaller funds like work study and Perkins, are limited, so usually you have to apply pretty early in the year, which the application becomes available every January 1. It's generally best to fill it out on January 1 and get it done, get in there and get your application in. Even if you're not sure what your plan is, at least it's in there so you have it as a backup option for you. You want to contact the school to see if there's something else that you need to follow up. Most of us won't give you a financial aid package unless you've applied for admission to our program, but certainly there are other requirements for things like the Graduate Plus loan, and depending on your school, they just may have an institutional financial aid application that you have to fill out before they would award you financial aid. Develop a plan. So I mentioned this sort of at the beginning, talking about you can't go in and just take a bunch of loans and be satisfied when you go out. So you need to look at what does the financial aid office offer me, and does that make sense for what my plan is? We will almost always offer you the maximum financial aid that you can get. So our job is to offer you sort of the buffet of financial aid options, which as graduate students is sort of a limited buffet, but they're there. So we're going to offer that, and then it's your job to pick and choose what you want and how much of it that you want. So don't just take it. That's pretty common that we see people just accept it. That at Western Oregon, or an Oregon resident, our estimate is that your cost would be about $26,000, $27,000 for a year of school. Most of our graduate programs take a year or two, maybe a little bit longer to complete. If you just take that loan, you're right on track for $50,000 plus in loan debt after 2 years. You need to be sort of looking at, can I afford to pay that back? Does this graduate degree open that many more doors for me? Does it make it worth another $50,000 in student loan debt? You can sort of look online. Studentloans.gov is where I go. It's a federal site. It's where I go to look at different repayment options. As financial aid has become more of a hot topic and the ability of people to be able to pay back their loans, new loan repayment options have come out. So there are some good options that we'll look at here in just a minute. But you need to sort of know about those going in so you don't hamstring yourself to where you get out of graduate school and now you're going to have to work like a dog because you can't even, make ends meet any longer. So some loan repayment plans and forgiveness options. There are some forgiveness options, which is when the federal government will forgive some of your loan, specifically for teachers. Again, there's Stafford loan forgiveness for teachers, $5,000 for most any teacher who serves for 5 years in a low-income school, and then up to $17,500 of forgiveness for special education math and science teachers. The caveat to this being, this is up to Congress to continue to appropriate funds. So while today this is appropriated for, tomorrow it could not be. I would say these are good things to know about, but I wouldn't, bank on them as you make decisions about your graduate education. There are some good things, some good ways to pay back your loans, whether if you're working for a school district, for a nonprofit, for a government agency. There's the public service loan forgiveness where you make 10 years of payments on your student loans, and then any balance after that 10-year period while you're working for an approved agency is forgiven. This is especially good if you end up with high debt in a lower paying field. So the best examples are typically law students that have extremely high student loan debt and then maybe go out to be a public defender in a county or something like that where they're not going to ever get paid well. But this can work for teachers as well. It could work for somebody in a role like mine even potentially. But there are some loan forgiveness options. There's also some good repayment options, pay-as-you-earn, income-based, income-sensitive, income-contingent repayment options where it looks at your particular scenario. So how much debt do you have? How much income do you have? It determines a repayment. And then in most of those plans, after so many years of paying, if you still haven't paid back your student loans after making all those payments, the loan balance would be forgiven. So there are some good things out there. I would say I'm encouraged, honestly, when I look at the average loan debt for our graduate students at $29,659, the median being $27,146. What I think is encouraging is, especially I didn't put this up here, but comparing it to our undergraduate students, their average loan debt is $28,000 something, which tells me a couple of things. A, I think our undergrad students are not being well positioned to go on to graduate school, which is totally unfortunate, but they have a lot of debt from undergrad. So the people that are coming to us in graduate school either didn't borrow much when they were undergrads, they paid some back, or they're not borrowing too much as graduate students. And so any of those scenarios makes me feel good about where they're at. This is still a manageable loan debt for most professions. If you're wanting to be a Peace Corps volunteer, this is going to be difficult. So hopefully that was thought of before that you got into things. But there are student loan options. There are federal financial aid options. They're not necessarily great, but there's something at least to be investigated. Scholarships. Certainly scholarships. Free money based on talent, merit, skill, ability, something that you bring to your program, to your school. Some students don't really think about scholarships much with graduate studies. I find people are really focused on scholarships if they're straight coming from high school to undergrad, and then we sort of fizzle out as we go through undergrad and we stop looking for scholarships, and then people get to graduate school and they just assume that there aren't any or they're busy with life. That's certainly not the case. So need to check with the institution that you're looking at to find out how do you apply for graduate student scholarships. There may not be a ton of options, but there's almost always some. Somebody's probably getting scholarship money to pay for school. So check both with the graduate school, so big graduate school level, and then check with your department to find out, do they know of anything? Maybe it's not even through the school, but maybe your department contacts, they're tuned into professional organizations to say, gosh, this isn't through Western, but it's through the National Association of ... has a scholarship program for you to go look through that. Web-based searches, as long as they're free, like anything, there's lots of information on the web. Some of it is good, some of it is not. There's some more reputable sites. any of these that you register for, I mean, they're not scams, but they're certainly partially marketing companies. So you're going to get a lot of junk. So set up a different email address if you don't want, to be full of things in your email inbox about scholarships that potentially don't apply to you. But it's worth looking at, in that all you're going to be out is a little bit of time filling out some profiles, and perhaps it's going to turn into something. I would say in my 12 years in the financial aid office here, I see people do much better with local, regional scholarship opportunities than they do applying for, the Coca-Cola scholarship that, while it's generous and it gives out 250 awards nationwide, they have, 217,000 applicants a year. Those are some pretty steep odds. So if you can find things more local, I think they would be the good way to go. Talk to others in your program. So as you're investigating your program, talk to the people that you're sitting with, talk to the cohort above you, or people who have gone before you to ask, how did you pay for school? Find out what they would have done differently. Most of us would. I would have done things differently in how I paid for graduate school, knowing what I know today than what I knew back in the day when I went. And then any other organizations that you're a part of, certainly look at for scholarship opportunities. State agencies, Oregon Student Access Commission. If you're from Oregon, this is a state agency that maintains sort of a bank of scholarship opportunities for donors that were interested in setting up scholarship funds, but they didn't want to go through all of the work of setting it up, maintaining it, making sure they're doing everything correctly in that regard. So OSAC has more than 400 scholarships that it manages. You apply using one common application, help filter out to see what you're eligible for. I would say the focus of these scholarships is undergraduate education, but there are certainly opportunities out there for graduate students. So it's at least worth looking at. You may spend, I don't think you'll spend any more than 20 minutes looking through, and you may find nothing. Then you're out 20 minutes. You may find a few things. Most of the scholarships are at least $1,000, a couple $1,000. Especially in the graduate education realm. So worth looking at, especially if you didn't spend too much time on it. There are some scholarship scams out there. Just I would say use good common sense. If it sounds too good to be true about anything paying for college, it probably is. College is expensive. Scholarships are competitive. There's no guarantees. But it should never cost you money. It shouldn't cost you money to apply for financial aid. It shouldn't cost you money to apply for scholarships. If any of those things are coming up, they should raise some red flags. If you see anything and you're not sure, or you want to bring it to the attention, I know our office loves when people bring us something saying, I wasn't sure whether I should really fill this out or not. A couple of years ago, we had some pretty widely distributed financial aid scam material that were sent to students living on our campus. They were sent to them residence halls. It looked official. It told them it was time to fill out their financial aid paperwork, which was a true statement. It had some information about them, and it asked them to fill out this form and send it back to this company in California with their $49 processing fee. If you read through it, it never said what they do. They were going to process it. It never said what that was. They weren't filling out the FAFSA. I called. They didn't want to talk to me, so they didn't have much to say. And unfortunately, by the time we found out about it and we emailed students and parents saying, hey, this company we think is bogus, we don't know anything about them, and we had multiple replies saying, well, how do I get my money back? So just be a wise consumer when you're looking for financial aid options. Assistantships. So graduate teaching and graduate research assistantships, a fantastic way to go. Building on what was said earlier, this is sort of that theory to practice. Like you can sit in a grad school class and be listening to a lot or doing a lot of reading, and it seems great, but if you don't get it into practice, then in 10 minutes or 10 days, it's probably gone. This is a great way to have that opportunity for professional practice within your chosen field. So certainly ask when you're looking at schools about what options there are. There are varying degrees of workload and application process depending on the school. So some schools have a lot of GTA or GRA positions, some schools have few. But it's definitely something to look at. Typically, what the compensation typically looks like is that your tuition is paid for you, and you get a small stipend. That's pretty typical. So if you can wipe out a whole major chunk of your cost of college, like tuition and fees, this is going to be a great way to go. There's certainly a trade-off. You're going to work hard, and you've got other hard work to do as a student anyway, but it would be something that I would say definitely you want to look into. Employer assistance if you're employed full-time. So when I went back to graduate school, I was employed here at Western Oregon, and within the university system, we had the benefit of having a much lower tuition rate if you were employed and wanted to take classes somewhere. So something like that worked for me. Maybe that would work for you if you're thinking, gosh, it would have been faster for me to go through graduate school had I quit my job and gone and gotten an assistantship. I'm not sure it would have been any cheaper, and I liked my job. I liked what I was doing. It would have been very similar to whatever I would have had for an assistantship. So it worked out for me to go to graduate school mostly on a part-time basis, occasionally on a full-time basis, and just I had the flexibility and support from my employer to do that. But look into that for those of you pursuing teaching. Certainly school districts may still contribute towards your education. For those of you who need a master's degree for licensing, or you're working on becoming a highly qualified teacher in perhaps a different field or in your original field, districts may appropriate money for that. And similarly, outside of teaching, it would be worth looking at whether your employer supports your graduate school endeavors to such a level that they would be happy to help pay for them. And loan repayment, I get this question a lot, and I've never actually talked to anybody who's left Western and told me I found this great company and they'll repay my student loans, but there are companies out there that will help with loan repayment when you're working for them, if they feel like that was a good investment, that you bring some skills. So it would be something that you could always ask about in a job search process or in talking about compensation options if you're being offered a position. Cost considerations. There are tons of good graduate schools, great graduate programs. If you're thinking of going to an out-of-state school, an out-of-state public school, I would encourage you also to be looking at, what's that worth and what are the private options, because you're probably paying about the same as you would for a private school at that point. So are there ways that you could get that down? If you're looking at going to an out-of-state public school, how long would it take for you to gain residency in the state? Are you willing to move to that state and maybe live for a year, relocate, and then pay a whole lot less in tuition? It might be worthwhile. If you're not, you're not. But it would be something to look at. I would say online too. People seem to be drawn to online programs. If that's a way that you learn, then great, look at it. Online often costs more, not always, but often it does cost more. So you need to look at, is that worth that trade-off? I will tell you, I've taken online courses, and the misnomer that I think a lot of people use is online equals easy. And it doesn't. Online is not an easier way of taking graduate school. Depending on your learning style, in fact, for somebody like me who's more relational and I want to sit down and talk to my professor or talk to my colleagues, I found it more difficult for that. Other people probably love that style. There's convenience certainly in there, but it's not easier. And then looking at cost considerations for what are opportunities that you'll have with this degree? Graduate school, I say it all the time in different presentations, it's not a good hobby. So if you're just interested in it because you're trying to add more, initials after your name or whatever, credentials, it's not worth it. You're going for the wrong reason. So look at, what does this really give you? What are your main motivators for going to college or for graduate school? If you don't know why you're going yet, then it's not the right time. Keep investigating, come back to it, do go, but not until it's the right time. And then look at what other costs can you reduce. So we talked about the GTA or GRA, getting rid of tuition and fees. Maybe you can be a residence assistant or a residence hall director, live on campus and help undergrads typically through their navigating the college lifestyle. That often eliminates the whole cost of food and room, your room or your rent. Textbooks, shopping around, certainly I think students have gotten way better than in my year when the only option was the bookstore. That's where you bought everything. And then other things. So often when I'm talking to students who are telling me they can't afford to come to school, it's not any of the costs within our budget that they're struggling with. It's their car payment and their credit card debt and all the things that I really can't help with federal financial aid. So are there things you could do? Would you be willing to sell your car to pursue your graduate study education? Is that a fair trade-off or not? And so just a couple of notes to review. Federal financial aid, it's available. It's worth looking at. It might not be the right option for everybody. Certainly look for scholarships, assistantship options, employer options, whatever will help you pay for college. Think a little outside the box. Don't just sign up for whatever the financial aid office gives you. And consider looking at costs, comparing options. Even if you fall in love with a graduate school, it would be good to research competitive schools to see if maybe there's somebody else who's going to make you a better financial offer, but provide an equal experience. I said it at the beginning, I'll say it at the end. I don't want to sound like the pessimistic naysayer, though. Graduate school is a great experience. It's a great thing to do, but I encourage you to go into it wisely, not just sign up for it. Make sure that you do what you need to do. Certainly, our webpage, their scholarship page, talks a little bit about graduate opportunities here at Western Oregon, and then our graduate program page can give you a thorough understanding of the programs that we have available here.
If you have any questions in regards to our policies, our procedures, our practices with the graduate office, we actually started a new program that went live this week that is on our website called the Online Orientation, and it's module-based so that once you click on there, you will go through the process of being able to see what generally the handbook would cover. We have an academics portion that will go through what your requirements are for getting your graduate degree. We have exit requirement sections that go over how to properly defend and do your thesis, your professional project, your portfolio. We have frequently asked questions that come in through email or phone calls that we're trying to provide those answers before you have the question. Some of our online learning, that's kind of broad, but it's more how to get onto the online services at this point. Some social, this is a small campus, but we wanted to provide students with some understanding of events, things that they could possibly attend. Student services, it mentions our health and wellness center, our counseling center, other services that you might need while on campus. And then support and technology. What we would like with this is if you have questions or there's something that isn't covered or is a little too dry, give us feedback. We want to have that feedback. This is all brand new to us. We used another school's system to kind of adapt into our system, but I highly recommend going through this online orientation and letting us know if you have any questions.